Hi, Dr. Tarman, and welcome to the Truth About Weight Loss Summit. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so excited to talk to you.
Thank you. I'm glad to be back, Chef AJ.
Well, you are just incredible. So, Dr. Tarman, can you talk a little bit about food cravings and how they are the saboteur of successful weight loss?
Yes, okay. We've had this chat a few times, and I thought that for people, especially if they've been following in other podcasts, I thought it might be interesting to show some slides to actually go over a little bit of the biology. And while I'm at it, you can see the picture of me on the side, I don't know, 25 years ago. And I don't look like that anymore because I finally started to take my own advice. But anyway, what I want to talk about is the idea of food cravings versus food pathology or eating pathology, which I would call food addiction. But if we're living in this environment, so here's the typical refined junk food environment that most of us live in, then I don't think anybody escapes if they're eating this stuff. I don't think anybody escapes the whole concept of getting food cravings because these foods, this food environment has been engineered to make us crave whether we're sick, puppies, whether we got a history of trauma in the past. It doesn't matter what. If we're eating this stuff, we're going to crave. So, the short lesson in my 20 minutes of today is, whoops, I'm going too fast. Is to say we got to get away from this. And then if a person has a history of trauma or has an eating disorder or just has learned to comfort eat, then we can deal with the situation a little bit more not cleanly, but well, yeah, we can unmuddy the waters. This here just makes things everybody is prone to having food cravings. So what's happening here is the reason why this conversation has become important. I mean, this is a weight loss focus, but in the larger society, in the medical world, which is where I work and live. I mean, I work in the addiction world, but very close to the addiction world is the obesity world, because so many people, when they stop their drug addiction, whether it's alcohol or cocaine or even cigarettes, nicotine, end up eating, and then they end up having an issue with obesity. So obesity is like big time in the medical world. And this slide here is just to show that you can see the different body shapes. What we call the body mass index, which is a sort of medical measurement that's not very accurate, it's not great, but it's the universal currency of discussion for research and clinical work and whatnot. And we have a sort of magical body mass index that we desire, which is between 20 and 24, 25, which Chef AJ and I fit into because we eat the proper foods that we're trying to promote here. And I think that most people would fit into that if they ate those foods. But, I'm coming from this world of either addiction or obesity and its research, basically because when you're beyond the body mass index of 20 to 25, which is the far, can you see my arrow as I'm moving it? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, good. When we move further to the right, we start dealing with all sorts of conditions besides just overeating, but the whole gamut of medical conditions. So that if a person is overweight, they may well have sleep apnea. They probably have fatty liver disease. It's called non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, still fatty liver disease, gallbladder disease, polycystic ovary, arthritis for sure, diabetes, what we call metabolic syndrome diabetes, dyslipidemia and hypertension. I mean, it's the bread and butter of medicine, cancer risks and even phlebitis or varicose veins. I mean, it's, like I said, the bread and butter of family medicine and internal medicine. And basically, the bottom line is that refined processed foods, whether they be meat-based, plant-based, it doesn't matter, processed foods, the operative word is processed foods, leads to obesity, which leads to these conditions. And, this is now a very popular message in the internet media and in the social, the medical world. But how to get to not eating refined foods is the issue that we want to talk about today. So this is a breakdown here of if we were to look at people saying, Chef AJ, you were saying, and I have the same experience. We have a client or a patient that comes in the room and says, okay, I understand I have to lose weight. I understand that I've got all these conditions because of the foods that I eat, but how do I stop eating these things? I don't know what to do. So this 20-minute, 15-minute talk is kind of to explain why you have that problem. And then depending on why, then how you can get around it so that the ultimate result is you're no longer eating processed food. So for people who are using food, whoops, I'm sorry, I went ahead too fast. If people are using food basically to comfort distress, had a bad day today, or even using food for previous distress, like I've had trauma in my past, and that's made me very anxious. It's made me very depressed. I have PTSD or I have bipolar disorder, and I use food to basically self-medicate. There's a neurobiological truth to that, and people can. I'm going to talk about that shortly. That's sort of where I'm going. Use the biochemical aspects of that processed food that we shouldn't be eating, but is jam-packed full of basically comforting neurochemicals that they're basically a drug to self-medicate. So there's real truth to this, and you don't have to be a disordered eater. You can just be super stressed and be using food in that way. And I want to explain some of that neurochemistry, because what we want to do is understand it so that we can see why we abuse it, and then why, when we don't abuse it, it actually makes things better. This is essentially we're just trying to sort of recalibrate ourselves back to the way we should naturally be eating. So that's the first category. It's probably the most common category. I use food to self-medicate, basically through the drug neurochemistry of food, the drug effect of food. And then there's another type of eater, the person that's been diagnosed as having an eating disorder, like bulimia or binge eating disorder or anorexia. And that's kind of like the extreme version of the first, the person who uses food as a drug, uses eating like drug-like behavior, but what they're trying to do is self-medicate, self-manage, self-discipline some kind of previous trauma, some kind of stress. So the theory behind these first two types of eaters is I'm using food to medicate a problem. So the first thing I want to do is, stop the food to medicate, but the ultimate thing that I need to do is I need to treat that problem, either through therapy or fixing the problem instead of medicating it all the time. But got to deal with the problem, and then the food will kind of right itself as long as I'm not constantly using it as a drug. But I won't need to if the problem is solved. And that's the medical model right there. Look for the problem, or treat the condition, but look for the problem, or treat the consequences of the condition. In other words, if I eat too much, I've got obesity, so I'm going to treat the obesity, but I'm also going to send you to the psychologist or the therapist to try to fix the problem, and then we're done. Now we have another category, a third category, which is not a medical approved diagnosis, but I believe in this diagnosis, and Chef AJ believes in this diagnosis, and many of us in the field who see that even when people stop eating or know they should stop eating comfort, and they've been to the therapist for years and they're still having trouble, we believe that there's a third category that hasn't been acknowledged, and that is that just the food that you're eating, it's not just that it's comforting and resolving distress, and that's why you use it. It's also because it in and of itself is addictive. It's like a drug, like cocaine, like cigarettes, like caffeine, that if I stop, I'm going to have withdrawal, I'm going to have further distress. So I'm just using it because it's in and of itself become an addictive pattern, and we need to address that. And that's sort of where I talk a lot in my Food Junkies book, and that's sort of where my passion is to say, hey, there's this third dimension that we have to talk about. But let's talk about the first dimension and the second, the sort of standard one. So like the idea of comfort eating or distress eating, and then with the problem in the background. Whoops, sorry about that. Uh, so in the normal pattern of my body is normal, but I have distress, and I'm living in an environment that is food toxic. In other words, processed food all around me that is making me want to eat. Um, I, I I don't have to think about addiction itself. That is in and of itself enough for me to be eating in a problematic way. So we have hunger hormones that make me hungry and satisfied. These are hormones that govern my appetite and govern my satiety. And they are the hunger hormones traditionally are known as ghrelin and leptin and insulin. So ghrelin is a hunger hormone. It is the hormone that is released in my stomach as it's emptying, and it's the thing that makes me aware that I'm hungry and I'm starting to think about food because it's 3 hours since my last meal, for example, and now I'm getting a little bit hungry, and it's almost like my body's getting ready for the meal that's about to come in the next hour or two. Um, as that hour or two comes closer and I'm beginning to anticipate the meal, my insulin is starting to get on board as well. Insulin is the hormone that is mainly it's increased when there's a sugar load in our body, whether that be an apple or a candy bar. And as I'm anticipating my meal, it's almost like the insulin is getting ready to do its job so that when I start eating, it's ready to carry the sugar of my food to my brain and my muscles and whatnot. If for some reason I'm on a plane and I can't get to my meal, but I'm hungry and I'm thinking about food, the insulin will be on board, but there's no food to be used. So it's going to start using the sugar that's in my system, and my sugar is going to go low. That's called hypoglycemia. And insulin is a hunger hormone in that the lower my sugar goes, the hungrier I'm getting. And if you've heard the term hangry, this is when I'm getting hungry. The fuel of sugar is low, and it's not just the hunger of, oh geez, it's hour 3 and it's time to eat. It's the hunger of, if I don't get fuel, I'm going to faint, and I could actually maybe even die. At least I'll feel like I can die. It'll kick in the stress hormone, and I'll start getting agitated and hungry, and like, have thoughts like, when is that waitress going to come and serve me? Because I can't wait any longer. It's that kind of agitated hunger. So ghrelin is basically the type of hunger that we want to live in. Just I'm kind of hungry. It's getting time to eat. Okay, it's good. I'm going to eat something. Insulin is like the alarm bell ringing. Hey, it's time to eat. Those are both hunger hormones. Leptin is the hormone that is released when I have eaten, and 20 minutes later after a meal, I'm getting full and I'm happy. So you'll see here I have something called the hunger scale. Food sobriety, food serenity, the way that Chef AJ and I are able to live because we eat proper foods, the unrefined complex carbs, like the stuff that takes 2 or 3 to 4 hours to break down, from the Brussels sprouts to the sugar that it eventually becomes, takes a few hours. My hunger will be ghrelin induced. It's that hunger of the stomach is slowly emptying, and I don't get lower than, if 1 is extremely hungry, 3 is like uncomfortably hungry. It's time to eat, but not terrible. I'm not hangry. Then I eat. And because I'm not starving, I'll only eat until I'm full, but not stuffed. And that's like an 8. If I am so hungry that the fuel is down, I'm eating ravenously, and I'm going to eat to the point where I get sick. And that's like a 10. And that's where we get into the restricting and binging type of eating, is from 1 to 10. And usually insulin is involved. A person has not eaten enough, or they've eaten a lot of sugar and they're crashing now, or they haven't eaten at all. Anyway, they're at the extremes. What we want to be is between a 3 and an 8. 8 is when leptin kicks in. I've eaten my Brussels sprouts. It takes a while to eat those things. I can't just gobble them down like I can a smoothie or a milkshake or some kind of candy bar, where that's in 5 minutes. And so now I'm still hungry because it takes 20 minutes for leptin to work and tell me that I'm full. A normal good unrefined food plan means that it'll take 20 minutes to half an hour to an hour to eat sometimes. I mean, really, we should be eating, our meals should last from half an hour to an hour for this leptin to kick in and for us to enjoy our foods and whatnot. And that would be the case if we were eating unprocessed foods. So we would be from a 3, which is ghrelin, to an 8, which is leptin. That's food sobriety. When the insulin is kicked in, or I'm doing the what do you call it, the binging and purging, and I'm at the extremes, just to go back to this, then this is pathology. And it's also linked to neurochemistry. But before we get to that piece, just we don't want to be at these extremes. And when people are comfort eating, eating disorder, and food addiction, they're at these extremes. Our goal is to be in this middle range between 3 and 8, which is a perfect hormonal measure. Now, the neurochemistry, I'm just going to go back to here. Like I said, we're looking at the leptin, ghrelin, and insulin should only be used in terms of hunger when, like I said, it's an alarm bell, so that it can work quietly in the background with the leptin and the ghrelin, ferrying the sugar. But we don't really want to use it as a hunger hormone. We want to use it as a sugar hormone. It's like it has two functions. Okay, so just to go back to this here, so I've talked here about ghrelin and insulin and leptin. Cortisol, which is our stress hormone, just enhances, it's basically a cousin to insulin. When my insulin is, or I am super hungry, super stressed, it's kind of like insulin on steroids. There's so much more to be said that I don't have time to talk about, but it just makes this pathology of eating worse. Cortisol, stress. It's not, we don't want to be stressed, partly again why you don't want to eat quickly. Now, the neurochemistry is below this, and in normal circumstances, I just want to point out to you that when you're between a 3 and an 8, you're hungry, or you're an 8, which is you're not that hungry. We have learned that there is a connection between the hormones and our feel-good neurochemicals. So as I've talked about in the past, and as anybody who's read up on addiction will know, dopamine is the major neurochemical of addiction. It's sort of like the mother, father, matriarch, patriarch of addiction. Although there are more than just dopamine neurochemicals that make us feel good that can be hijacked by drugs and alcohol and food. Dopamine is the key one. And even if that's all you understand, you'll understand like 80% of the whole addiction paradigm. But dopamine is a neurochemical that we all have, and it is our neurochemical that makes us feel excited and looking forward to, and pleasure. And if I'm looking forward to a meal, oh my God, I can't wait till I get home and have whatever, I'm actually experiencing dopamine. That's what dopamine does, is it makes me fantasize and look forward to. So as I'm sitting there getting hungry, think about when you're slightly hungry, you start to think about food. You're not like crammed, fixated on food, but you're starting to think about it, because ghrelin is a kind of nudge of hunger, then the nudge of, geez, might be nice to start thinking about where will I go to eat for lunch. I wonder what I'm going to have, but I'm not like fixated. I'm just starting to think about it. If I'm getting hungrier and the ghrelin is getting more because my stomach is emptying, then that dopamine will rise. So there's a connection. When this goes up, this goes up. More ghrelin, more hunger, more fantasizing about food. If I'm in the unfortunate circumstance where the insulin alarm bell is rung, this is when all you can do is think about food and, forget about the Brussels sprouts. As soon as I get out of this meeting, I'm going to go downstairs and have the biggest donut possible. I'm going to have the biggest, most fatty, sugary, refined thing, which will give me my punch of sugar because the alarm bell is ringing. So dopamine goes skyrocketing into the realm of drug. So when my insulin is up because I'm starving or because I'm eating sugary foods that have made it go up because I'm hypoglycemic, I'm just feeding the fuel to keep that going, because I'm going to want more sugar. And then the more I want sugar, the hungrier I get, and then the more I want sugar. It's just a momentum. So that's how that works. If we don't eat refined foods, this doesn't happen, and we can get out of that loop. But if we're in that loop already, just know that, and we're not even talking about addiction yet. I'm going to move to that in a minute. Just know that if you can step out of that loop, um, and eat something that is complex carb with protein and fat, and as unrefined as possible, you may suffer some of the withdrawal because you want a huge hit of dopamine, but it's going to right itself. Um, and it has to right itself. Like, it's going to calibrate itself, recalibrate properly. And then the drug effect will dampen. Then, now, Chef AJ and I have talked about this in other sessions. Can you deal with stressful events when you're drugged out on food? I am because I'm an addictions doctor. That would be like saying, "Can I do therapy on somebody who's drunk or who's high on cocaine?" No, because they're high, they can't register all the nuances of therapy that are needed to fix the problem. And similarly with food, you may not think you're drunk on food, but when your dopamine is skyrocketing because your insulin and your is so up, you're drunk. You may not feel like it, but you are, and you'll see it later when you're off the substance. Just like the person who's sober will realize, oh yeah, boy, was I ever stupid at that time, but at that time I didn't see that. It's the same thing. So we want to get off the drug and then fix the problem. And because this isn't in and of itself a problem, if you stop eating that food, if you change that food environment, you should be okay to fix the problem. Now, let's go to the third problem, or the third dimension, which is food addiction itself. And this is where we think maybe 30 to 40% of the population exist. If we've been living in an environment that has been food toxic, and our dopamine has been hijacked and the insulin has been hijacked for so long that things have actually there's no things, I want to say things have broken and there's no going back. We now are in a situation where we can get our feet back on the ground, but we're not the same person anymore. In other words, for example, once I actually have become, I might be pre-diabetic and but never actually become diabetic, and then it's fine. I can have sugar once in a while. But if I actually become diabetic, there's no more going back to sugar and thinking that my sugars will be normal. They will skyrocket the moment I put sugar in my mouth. Like, at a certain point, once you're a diabetic, you remain a diabetic, but you can get your sugars clean as long as you're eating clean. And similarly in the brain, once you become addicted, there's been changes to that dopamine because there's been so much abuse to that system, so much neuroadaptation to that system. There's no going back. And now you can, and I'll identify myself as one of these people, as long as I don't eat the foods that will trigger that whole pathway, I look normal, feel normal, etc. But the moment I pick up something, it would be as if I'm diabetic, my sugars will skyrocket. But in my case, in a person who identifies as sugar addicted or food addicted, the dopamine will skyjack or hijack right up there again with just a little bit of sugar, even just a bit. Like, there's no moderation. I just can't have it. And that phenomena where it's now, forget about the stress, forget about the problem in the past. It's just the damn food, and not even that much of it, that causes the problem. That's food addiction. And I believe that because so many of us have been exposed to food, sugars in the amounts that they have for the years that they have, we have a lot of people who are damaged and should not have any sugar anymore, because they're going to just be constantly craving beyond willpower, beyond the ability to fix any problems. It's got nothing to do with the problems anymore. It's got to do with the food itself. And you got to stay off of that food. And that's got to do with the neurochemistry. and this part of the brain here. So I'm just going to go to this slide. So I'm going to just backtrack with all what I've said. When you reach that point, that third point where there's no going back, what's happened is you're in this part of the brain here, which is the reward pathway, which is where addiction goes and hijacks. And and that reward pathway is easily hijacked by cocaine, heroin, nicotine, and sugar, food. If it's been at the level of exposure of refined foods and the years. I'm not talking about a little bit here and there, but that's not what people are doing anymore. And literally, if we did just a little bit here and there, like my grandmother, for Christmas, and for Christmas they had tangerines, and for maybe a little bit of shortcake, and that was it. You're not going to have an addiction damage, like the damage of addiction, the damage which addiction is the end result, as we will with the foods of today. So we can throw food into this. Gambling and sex is normal. Sex is like, it's part of the reward path. It's part of life. However, we have made porn so it's like sex at the drop of a hat. The drop of a hat. It's at the turn of a page. It's at the flick of a Netflix, whatever, or not Netflix, but whatever. It's like quick, fast, as much as I want. That's like not natural. Sugar is the same thing. You take a natural impulse and you damage it, our checks and balances, in such a way that now a sex addict is essentially doing the same thing that a food addict is doing. They're measuring the amount that they have. They're saying, no, I can't have this. I can't have this. They have to put parameters around which define abstinence, and then they can't do the triggering substances anymore at all, or else they're in trouble again. It's kind of like a crutch, or its treatment parameters, just like a crutch is, or like medication is, like diabetic medication for the diabetic. And if we weren't that sick, we wouldn't need it. But so many of us have gone beyond the point, and we need it. We need it in some way. Okay. So that's this addiction piece here. I'm going to say one more thing about this, and then I'm going to throw it out to you, Chef AJ, to ask me questions if you like. This part of the brain here, which is where our reward pathway is a primitive, subconscious part of us. It is not my consciousness. It's below that, and it's quicker than my consciousness. My consciousness is pretty slow. I may think I'm a fast thinker, but this other part of me is much faster. This is the part of me that sees and smells and flinches from danger even before I recognize it. A person has a craving for something, the smell of some food, the sight of something, the thought of something, and they're already getting ready to pick up the substance before they recognize that it's happening. What we've got is this middle part of the brain that's like the reptilian. You think about the lizard that flicks its tongue out even before you see it, and the part of us that recognizes, oh yeah, this is dangerous. Oh, I better not do that. Up here, the frontal lobe, our willpower is slow. It's slow. The thought of, I should just stop doing this. This is why we can't stop, because we haven't even figured out that we're in trouble, and we're already picking up and planning. The addict part of us, the diseased part of us, is much faster. It's much more animalistic. It's not thinking. It's instinctive almost. It's built into the instinctive survival part of us. And so that the clumsy intellectual part of us up here is like stumbling 3 blocks behind, as this other part of me is like, already planning the binge. And those of us who have tried to use willpower, the sicker you become, in other words, the more hijacked this middle part, reward part of the brain is, the faster it is and the slower the willpower is. That's why it doesn't work. So what we have to do is build in rules like, don't have any sweets in the house. Don't go to a buffet. Don't go to the sweet shop and think you're going to be able to say no. Like, you're going to have to build in rules. If you're going to a wedding, I'm not going to go to the cake tray area. I'm going to have somebody go and get the food for me, or I'm not going to go at all, or I'm not going to see my food buddy friends, or whatever it is. In the same way that we would ask an alcoholic that they're not going to go to a bar, on their first year of recovery. So basically, we're using addiction tools to curb our appetite, essentially, which is not, it's a hijacked appetite. And bottom line is, it is not, although it may start as being because of a problem like previous trauma or difficulty with stress of work today, I don't like my job, whatever. Ultimately, if we're in the food environment that we're in, that makes it involves a level of neuroadaptation that takes over and is far bigger a monster, a disorder than the initial comfort distress piece. So we have to fix that first. And how do we do that? Well, we have to step out of the whole toxic food environment with help, because you're not going to want to do it. You're hijacked. You're married to it. You're glued to it. You have to actually step out of it, and that requires help, like a food coach or food rules or whatever it is. So, Chef AJ, that was a very fast, dense talk, but ask me questions if you like to go further there. Or
Yeah, absolutely. That was amazing. It's something we're going to have to watch over and over again. One of the last terms you mentioned, and one of the previous speakers, Dr. Ellen Goldhammer, talked about this concept of neuroadaptation.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Okay. So you want me to elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, and maybe if you're done with your slides, maybe take it off so that we can see you.
Okay. Okay. Let me just show you this one slide, and then I can go on with the neuroadaptation. So, I talked about the neurochemicals, and mainly dopamine is the one. That's the sort of, like I said, the matriarch of addiction. We also have a couple of other pleasure neurochemicals like serotonin and endorphins. And serotonin is where dopamine is the excited, I'm looking forward to, I can't wait till Christmas, that sort of feeling. I can't wait until I win $1,000,000. Serotonin is the neurochemical of I feel really satisfied and good. It's the gratitude, I'm grateful kind. And I want to mention that before I turn off the slides, because when we talk about recovery, if you're that part of that 30 or 40% that has gone over the line, that you're not just using food for comfort, but for the food itself, which is the addiction piece. What do we do to recover? Well, we stop the whole process, but it's really hard to stop because you're right in the middle of this. You're caught in this big thing. Serotonin is the kind of salve. It's the soothing comfort that I can give somebody who wants their next fix. And serotonin, how do I do that? Serotonin is the neurochemical of, like I said, of gratitude, of comfort, but it's the comfort of social, like the hug, which we can't do, unfortunately, right now, which, by the way, with COVID is bad news. The fact that we can't socially engage is really bad for addiction. Anyway, it's the people connection. It's the opposite of addiction being overtaxed dopamine is connection. That's serotonin. So we have to really beef up on the serotonin, which is the support and gratitude. And endorphin is our neurochemical of pain relief, which is like the opiates. So the neuroadaptation, when you have, this is the last piece and then I'll turn the slides off. When you have this burst of dopamine, which is what happens with addiction, instead of the 3 to 8, it's the 10 or the 1, it's like the extremes. The brain does not like extremes, and so it tries to normalize even extremes. And it does that by neuroadapting to those excessive extremes, so that a 10 will feel like a 3, because we want to be at a 3 or we want to be at an 8. So it's going to change our brains so that the outside will feel more like it's like a normal, like it'll feel like what it should. But in fact, it isn't, because the moment you're no longer getting all that stuff, you're going to be, your brain has changed and you have the expectation of having a huge amount of dopamine when in fact that's not realistic.
Wow, the opposite of addiction is connection.
Yeah, that's not my phrase, but it's very true. I'd like to claim that one, but it isn't mine.
So, Dr. Tarman, in case somebody is new to this summit and hasn't really heard much about the term food addiction,
Yes.
or maybe they've heard about it, but they don't quite understand it, or maybe even don't believe it, how would you define food addiction?
Okay, so I mean, what I've given you just now is a sort of the difference between like comfort eating and this disorder, this dynamic of food addiction. But so in a way, I've given you the story, the backstory behind it. But the front end, how do I know what is food addiction? It's when a person, usually we mean, when we say food addiction, we usually mean sugar addiction or refined carb addiction. And that's because that's where it starts. Sugar is the immediate dopamine fix. That then we have a neuroadaptation to. So, but then over time, a person can start to even eat inappropriately good food, normal healthy food, by overeating too much or whatever. Like they start developing what looks like an eating disorder, but it's in fact an addiction. So food addiction is when you have a disorder of food, usually refined carbs, um, and you the dope you have you've had so much exposure that the well, how do I say? Okay, so the clinical picture is somebody who eats and can't, and although they want to stop eating that much because they see that it's causing weight gain and obesity and all these conditions, they can't control it. And they can't control it even though there's impairment, and then they can't stop it. So it's when you like something to the point where it becomes an obsession, it becomes problematic in your life, and you can't stop it, and you're trying to stop it, and you can't stop it, and you want to stop it. So those are the attributes of any kind of addiction, including food, which usually starts with sugar. I
Right.
hope that was clear enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, sugar and wouldn't you say for a lot of people, all the refined carbohydrates, flour and alcohol too?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. And yes, because I mean, it starts with there's probably some addictive component with fats and with salts and with proteins, but sugar is the first one because sugar is pure fuel to the brain. So our brain, our bodies have been primed to like sweets anyway, especially fatty sweets. And if we have what nature has given us, it has its own checks and balances so that I will only eat as much as until I'm full and I can't eat anymore. And I won't want anymore because the checks and balances are such that I want the stuff until I don't need it anymore, and then I don't want it anymore. And addiction is when you still want it even when you're full and you don't want it anymore. You still want it. And that happens when you're not eating proper food, like unrefined, you're eating refined food, which is basically pre-digested food that has been made to make you eat more than you should.
Absolutely. So would you say that food addiction began when the processing of food began? Because I can't imagine
Yeah.
our ancestors struggling with this, or even people in parts of, say, rural Africa
Yes,
having binge eating disorder or food addiction.
absolutely. Yes. So, I mean, I think we can say, if we ate the way that people ate 200 or 300 years ago, we wouldn't have addiction, sugar addiction, nor would we have diabetes. Like in a sense, diabetes is the physical manifestation, and food addiction is the mental manifestation of refined foods, refined sugars. And yeah, and then once that's been broken, then people, it becomes so broken that other things break too. And so then they end up becoming addicted to other things like proteins and eating behaviors. But that's later on in the game.
Right. So do food addiction and emotional eating always go hand in hand? Or so, for example, could somebody be an emotional eater without suffering food addictions? And could somebody be a food addict without emotionally eating?
Yes, I think that it's probably fair to say that, I mean, I've made the three distinctions: the emotional eater, the sort of person with an eating disorder like bulimia, and food addiction. I made those three different categories, but I actually think that it's a continuum because because we are built into us is to enjoy food and to use food as a comfort. I think that most people, especially if we're eating in this food environment, will be using food as a kind of self-medication, comfort. Most people do. And it's the people who have been doing it for the longest and the most that then cross over the line into food addiction. Uh, so I think that's the beginning phase. And you might just be at that beginning phase because you haven't had enough exposure. It's kind of like everybody, if they have a drink or two, feels the buzz of, oh, I feel relaxed, I'm good, but I'm not an alcoholic. But if you've had enough exposure and over a long period of time and enough of it and fast and more, then you cross a line at which now I just need it, because if I don't, I'm going to go in withdrawal. And that happens with sugar too. But that's later on. Except that later on in our food environment is getting closer and closer to people. It's happening now to kids because they've had the exposure that I've had over a lifetime. They've had in 5 years, you know?
Wow.
Yeah,
So it's largely an environmental disease.
absolutely. Yes, it's absolutely, well, environmental. I would like to say it's actually a food industry created disease. But yes, if you want to be diplomatic, you can say it's an environmental disease.
Well, I mean, it seems like there's also maybe a strong biological component and even a psychological component.
Yes, absolutely. You can, just like the alcoholic, can have a predisposition. And in fact, the alcoholic has the predisposition for food addiction and vice versa, like, because it's all addiction. It's all addiction. So you can have a genetic predisposition. And absolutely, if you've had what we call the adverse childhood events, the ACE, basically trauma in your past, you're also predisposed to having, the stress, the whole uh, coping mechanism has been already damaged or challenged, so that you're just a walking target for any kind of hijacking that can occur, whether it be cigarettes or alcohol or food. But food is everywhere, like most people who are addicted to these other substances are also addicted to food, like they're dual addicted.
It seems to me that if somebody suffers from these food addictions or is vulnerable to the effects of these processed and refined carbohydrates, dieting is not a very good idea because all
No,
it's doing is telling you to eat less of addictive substances.
absolutely. Yeah. Dieting. I'm not a fan of dieting because it doesn't address the dilemma, and it actually just makes you hungry. So that makes that insulin go up, and therefore the dopamine goes up. It just makes the craving stronger. And it's another reason why, I mean, this is going to be, um, this is so popular right now, the whole concept of intermittent fasting. I'm not a fan of that for food addiction. That's a fancy word for dieting or restricting. And if a person does want to do intermittent fasting, which for those of you who don't know what that means, it means basically restricting your food within parameters like, maybe 12 hours in a day or 16 hours a day. I don't eat anything. But basically, you starve for a period of time. Um, I, if you have a problem with eating, I think you're just going to make that problem worse. And a person who would do intermittent fasting because they're diabetic or they have a health problem should do it under the care of a physician, or somebody who knows what they're doing. Not a food coach out there on the internet land, but somebody who knows what they're doing, because you're just going to get yourself into more trouble. The addictive web is so. I mean, when we're dealing with this processed food thing, it's I don't know. Intermittent fasting would probably work if we ate the foods of 200 years ago, but we're not. We're not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Well, I see so many people, and I don't know if you've ever studied this, that have food addictions that also have some sort of binge eating disorder.
yeah,
And it always seems to come from some kind of restriction in their past.
yeah, that's right. Because they're in that realm of the extremes, not the 3 to 8, which is, I never get that hungry that I have to stuff myself. I just get hungry enough like it's time for a meal, and that's good. But when you're so hungry because you're either following an intermittent fasting regime or you're trying to diet off all that stuff that you binged from the night before. So I'm not going to eat for 2 more days. Well, what's going to happen is that in 2 days, when you eat again, you're going to eat a 4-day supply in the one day. And then you have to do it's like it doesn't work. It doesn't work.
Yeah.
You're just getting more and more into the vortex of
Yeah.
this eating.
Yeah, it's like I see binge, restrict, repeat,
Yeah.
and it becomes,
Yeah.
like you say, a vicious cycle. What do you think the biggest obstacle that people that suffer from food addictions struggle to overcome?
Well, the biggest obstacle in the get-go and the first is to believe that it's possible. Like, people will go, how am I not going to be able to eat bread? Oh my God. Or how can I, not have sugar? So just that initial aghast fear of not having their substance, which is the same as the person who thinks, how will I not get through a day without a cigarette, or a drug or a drink? So that's the first obstacle, to believe that it's possible and you need help. So maybe the second obstacle is asking for help and building it in. You have to build it in. If you just rely on your willpower, you're going to throw it away. It just doesn't work. I've worked in addiction long enough to know that at least in the first early days, you can't do this alone. And then the biggest obstacle once you've stopped is to convince yourself that you can't. It's like once you're a pickle, you're not a cucumber anymore. Is that you can't go back and just have a little bit. Like I'm sure, Chef AJ, if I were to make some kind of sugary thing, and you're going to say no,
Right.
right?
Not a drop, not a morsel, not a crumb.
Exactly. So there's something in you that knows that you're just not going to do that because that's dangerous. It's probably not even enticing to you, but even if it were somewhat enticing, you probably know I'm not going there. Like for me, I know even if you've made it in such a way that it's like, oh my God, that looks good. I know no way am I going there, because then I'm just going back to that misery, because it'll start. It's like a fire to kindling that's just sitting there waiting for that flame, and I don't need that flame. So it's believing that you can't go back. But the good news is you don't want to go back.
Well, for me, abstinence is a lot easier than trying to, dance that moderation dance. But do you
Yeah.
think that total abstinence is necessary for people with addiction?
With addiction, yes, but not everybody is an addict. And as I was explaining earlier, in the earlier part, which was talking about the people who are just using for comfort or for psychological disorders like eating disorders, if in fact they sort out their psychic distress and don't wade into the total refined food thing, because that stuff is made to make us want to eat more, but they might be able to have a little bit, like basically moderate foods, because they're not gone so far gone. So yes, I do believe it's possible for some people. I think it's probably only 30 to 40% of the population um, who can't go back. But you
Right.
know what? I think that people know in their hearts, and it's the addict that makes them pick up again.
So is that what causes the recidivism? The fact, I mean, is it the social environment? Because
Yeah. Well,
I know.
the social environment, definitely, but uh, it's our own addict that says, come on, I can manage this, because that's part of addictive thinking, is that I can manage this until you've really been beaten blue in the face and you know that you can't. But there is a social environment out there, and it's nasty, because it finally, after how many 30, 40 years, we now have a smoking environment where the social norm is go outside in the cold. Nobody wants to do that, so people are quitting smoking. If we did the same thing with sugar, you're going to have dessert, sure, but you have to go outside in the cold, in the dark, then you can have your dessert. That would be great.
You are a medical doctor who's also an addiction specialist. What are the most successful strategies you've implemented in your patients to help them I don't know if you can overcome an addiction, but or manage their addiction?
Yeah. So overcome, I don't think so. Once you become an addict, like I said, once you're a pickle, you're not a cucumber. But you can manage. You can absolutely manage. And the first thing would be get a support system. And first of all, get a coach. Get somebody to help you get off the damn drug of food. Right. So that would be the first thing. And then you want to have a support system to support you through the hump, and then to keep you sober and clean. And that's routine in addiction. It's always about the opposite of addiction is connection. You need to have people, and you want to. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is you have to have foods and an environment that supports the pleasure of eating. Like, it's not just food as fuel. It's this food, which is healthy, which is unrefined, which is not going to make me addictive, is actually more desirable than that other stuff. Like, it's a pleasant place to be, um, and also I'll feel a lot better. Like, you want to build as a tool an actual positive view that the person will be going. In other words, building a hopeful place. This is not about deprivation. This is about feeling better and actually feeling empowered. Um, I think that that's a really important tool, because most people, when they think about it, I have to stop this, they're thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be deprived all my life. No, this is actually, you'll feel far less deprived and much more strengthened.
So many people say to me, but even the thought of giving up sugar or alcohol or whatever, it's going to make me want it more. Isn't
I
that
know.
what addiction is? Isn't that because
Yeah.
if you said to me, gosh, you have to give up okra, I'd be like, all right.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But that experience is part of withdrawal, and that only lasts 2 to 3 weeks. You're absolutely right. You will feel deprived. The same as if you stop using your Dilaudid or your fentanyl or your cocaine, you're going to feel deprived. And yes, you will. That's called withdrawal. But it's a neuroadaptation now. In the same way as you neuroadapt and become addicted to something, you can essentially become undependent to it. Takes about 2 to 3 weeks. You just got to get through that hump, and then the deprivation will go.
I just think most people they're looking for a pill for every ill and they don't want to experience the pain of withdrawal.
Yeah, but the pain of withdrawal it's not that long. So yes, and that's where, it would be nice if we had, like we have with treatment centers, a 3 or 4 week residential setting. You know,
The pain of withdrawal is not that long, but the pain of addiction is a lifetime.
exactly. Love it. And people get locked up for 3 or 4 weeks, and then they walk out and they're so much better. I tell you, people are, I don't want to leave the place. I feel so much better. I can't believe how good I feel. Like, that's what it is. So yes, compared to the 30 years before where they said, what took me so long?
As an addiction specialist, do you ever see people switching one addiction to another one? Maybe it's a little bit healthier. Like, I can't tell you how many people I know that stop sugar only to develop like an 18 can of Diet Coke per day habit,
God,
or to
yeah,
walk around with these bottles of stevia, and not
yeah,
the green leaf that's found in nature, but this highly processed liquid or powder, and
yeah,
literally having to put dropfuls just to drink water.
yeah. Wow. Yes, absolutely. You're just feeding the addiction, but you're prolonging the agony. It's a bit like using nicotine gum when you're trying to quit smoking. Okay, fair enough. That might be one approach. I think if you can just get through those first 2 or 3 weeks, then you're done. I mean, it's either you're going to do it slowly using another, but it is just substituting, and you're still keeping the addiction going.
How would you define a trigger food?
A trigger food is anything that gets that dopamine going again. So you may have first been eating a lot of sugar, and then you stop eating the sugar, and now you're eating a lot of bagels or popcorn. So you're getting kind of the same. It's like a muted or similar type of drug. Pardon me, experience that and makes you. A trigger food is it's basically anything that gets your dopamine up. So that could be looking forward to something. And it's basically anything that puts the fuel onto that fire so that you're back to eating again. And that could be sweets, it could be nuts, it could be
Yeah.
dairy, it could be um, the initial addiction is sugar, but then you end up having all sorts of other things that keep the fuel of the addiction going.
Right. Is it similar to a gateway food?
Yes, that would be the exact same. Yeah, that's another way of saying the same thing.
So it's possible a food might even be a healthy food, but for a
Yeah,
particular individual, like I know for me,
yeah,
I just can't eat nuts. I cannot have a single nut in the house. And I know nuts are very healthy, but I
yes.
just can't moderate them.
A lot of people find that nuts are very triggering, as a lot of people find cheese triggering, or dairy triggering. So it's yes, yes, it's a gateway. It's whatever gives that excitement, and these are things in the gray area. You have a problem with nuts, but some other people don't. So we know that most people can eat sugar and probably flour, like bagels and that kind, bread and that kind of stuff. But then we get into sort of a mix area where it's nuts and dairy and chocolate, and like they some can and some can't. If you want to be squeaky clean and be like we would do at a treatment center, we would say no to all of that stuff, and then you can try to reintroduce later and see. But this is where a food coach comes in really handy, because they'll help you figure out your basically gateway/trigger foods.
Right.
Yeah. And
What
it's
do you
not
think?
about
Oh,
weight loss. Let me just say that. And this is not about weight loss. This is about managing the obsession to eat in the brain. And then when that's managed, the weight just takes care of itself.
right. That's what I was going to say. We haven't even gotten to weight loss yet because I think until one can learn to manage their food addictions, it's almost a moot point.
Exactly, exactly. Because then you're just white knuckling it until you can eat, and then you'll eat, and then you'll gain all that weight back. So,
There's so many diets, popular diets today recommend cheat days.
yeah, I know. That's nuts. That's like, we
It's
know
like
that.
telling an alcoholic, oh, you can drink on Sunday.
Yeah, exactly. It's exactly. And what it does is it, you're just finally recalibrating, and then you throw in something, and now you got to do it all again. You've got to recalibrate all again. And the problem is what's happening is the brain is readjusting, and then you get this wallop of something. So it's super exciting. What you're actually doing is building in a kind of learned model that you're not even aware of I'm going to have this super experience, and then I'm going to crash, and then you got to deal with that. That becomes an addiction. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah.
How can we help people that are struggling with food addictions that live with unsupportive family members in an unclean environment? Is there any hope for them? It's
I
so hard.
It's really hard. It's really hard. This is why so many people in the addicted world, they go into treatment, they get off of their cocaine, and then before you know it, as soon as they go back home, they're back using again because they're living in an environment where it's everywhere. And we have the very same thing happening with food. Person goes back and they eat. The only way it would work is if the partner would be compliant, and would be, if they're still going to eat this stuff, that they're going to keep it locked away somewhere, that that's my cupboard, and you don't go in there and I don't go in yours, so that it's out of sight, out of mind to the food addict. And that they respect the boundaries, like you don't say in the middle of a Netflix show, hey, you want some of my candy. You just don't do that. So and then that food addict has a support, which luckily with Facebook and Zoom meetings and all that stuff, there's more and more of that they get hooked into the social support, so that they might be able to say no when their partner offers them something. But that's probably the biggest obstacle, is the addict partner, or the partner
Unsu-
get it.
Unsupportive. Yeah.
They don't get it, or they don't
I
want.
would just, I would think, I think that when it comes to things like drugs and alcohol, people understand that if they want to be successful, they can't keep these substances in the house. Not that their spouse can't drink. But yet when it comes to food, it seems like it's torture for the individual with this problem,
Yeah,
because the family members, like you say, they could be little addicts themselves, whether they struggle with weight or not. But
yeah,
I just find it's so difficult for the people. And that's why I
yeah.
have a motto: if it's in your house, it's in your mouth.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. And the only way we're going to change that is if we change the norms overall. So that for me to say, we're having a party, and I don't want any drugs in the party. That's probably okay to say now. Can you imagine saying no dessert? Like, but maybe one day we'll have that norm.
Right. You had mentioned that how important connection is, that the
Yeah,
opposite of addiction is connection. So we don't know how long the pandemic and the physical
yeah,
distancing is going to end. It's going to be different probably for different people where they live. So how do we help the people that are isolating, not through any fault of their own,
yeah.
with this problem?
I don't know. This is the problem, because we've got the food industry more than eager to help them with their offerings. Like all these baking thing things that you can join. Thanks to COVID. That's terrible. It's just terrible. It makes me really upset when I see that stuff. How people have gotten into baking as a COVID activity. We need to have an alternative support. Like, I mean, thankfully, Zoom has really blossomed, and that we just got to build more of that sort of thing. And it's happening. It is happening. Like, I have a
And,
Facebook group,
oh,
there's Facebook groups out there that are supportive of people to quit sugar and stuff like that. More and more of that is happening, and we just got to keep making sure that happens.
are modalities that can sometimes help people manage addictions, things like maybe exercise or playing a musical instrument, or crafts, or things that engage the brain and the body in different
Yeah,
ways than
yeah,
lifting the fork?
yeah, right. Lifting the fork. I mean, really, what you're suggesting there is, we have dopamine, which is our natural neurochemical of motivation, anticipation, desire. What we want to do is reorient, use that. We don't want to flatten it. I mean, I could take medication and just nullify dopamine so that I don't want anything. I'm numb. I'm flat. But I don't want that. What I want to do is find other passions to apply my dopamine. get on a different horse and ride a different horse. So that would be like music and connect, like, chess, because of that Netflix show. Um, uh, Getting interested and curious about things again. Absolutely. So find ways to manifest dopamine naturally, like finding interests. Find ways to manifest serotonin rather than by eating pasta and turkey or something that's going to make me feel uh, kind of comfortable, lazy, comfortable. I can do that in a different way by like meditating or just learning how to chill by listening to music. Like there's natural ways to get these neurochemicals. When we talk about recovery, the concept of recovering addiction is I want to recover my natural feel good chemistry back to its normal. I want to recover it by doing stuff that I naturally am built to do, like to enjoy singing, to enjoy connecting, to enjoy reading, that sort of thing. Drugs have hijacked that, and I'm recovering it back.
I remember when I first got off sugar and flour, I never think, wait, liked alcohol. I lost weight very slowly. And I remember I was still overweight, no, not obese, but I was overweight. I remember saying to my husband, I feel so good. Like I could feel I felt differently in my brain. Like it was the first time in my life I felt calm because I wasn't constantly craving sugar, because I used to wake up every morning and I couldn't get out of bed without a Coke Slurpee. My husband would have to go to 7-Eleven on some days because I couldn't drive. And then I had to go back to 7-Eleven and refuel with a Dr. Pepper. And I remember when I got off sugar, this was I remember the day, July 6, 2003. After a week, and my detox wasn't 3 weeks. It was the first 3 days were miserable. The first 6 days, not so great. But after about 7 days of eating really clean, being in an environment of rest, it was like, just like bliss. Like I was so calm. And it was like, even though I was still overweight, I was like, wow, is this what it feels like to be a normal person, not to be craving sugar every second of every day, or thinking about what I'm going to eat or when I'm going to eat or where I'm going to get it. And I wish that was a selling point, because if people could feel in their brains the way we feel in our brains, like you say, the weight it's not even the main driver. It's just that feeling calm and stable.
That's right. The freedom from obsession. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the best. So, Dr. Tarman, what is the real truth about weight loss?
Well, from Dr. Tarman's point of view, the real truth is find what it is that you're eating that's making your weight be excessive. It's most likely addictive. Find the trigger food, manage the trigger food, in other words, abstain from it, and then the mind will be quiet, and then the weight will right itself.
Amen. Thank you so much, Dr. Tarman.
Okay, thank you again, Chef AJ. I hope that this biology explanation was helpful.
Absolutely.